the Dead, Chapter 1. On a pitch-black night, the small ship sailed through the turbulent waters of the sea. A fierce storm raged from every direction, with colossal waves crashing against the side of the vessel, as if attempting to swallow it whole. Aboard the ship, there were only 4 passengers, each coming from different places, but all heading toward the same destination: a remote island known in legends as the Island of the Dead. This island had been abandoned for centuries, and it was said that anyone who ventured too close to it vanished without a trace. Yet, for some strange reason, this small group of people had chosen to take the risk and sail toward it. That night, the moon was concealed behind thick clouds, and darkness enveloped the ocean like a heavy shroud. "Are you sure this is the right destination?" asked Mark, who considered himself the boldest adventurer of the group. His face was slightly puzzled, yet there was a clear sense of excitement in his voice. He knew the island held deep secrets, and he was determined to uncover them, no matter the risks. "Yes, this is the right path," Sarah, the doctor of the group, replied as she studied the ancient map she held. "Everything points here, and we must reach it before the storm intensifies." But deep within their hearts, everyone felt something strange. There was something unnatural about this island, something that quickened breaths and made hearts race. The legends spoke of how anyone who visited this island became a part of its eternal mystery, and no one ever returned to tell the tale. As they drew closer to the island, the air grew thicker, and towering shadows began to loom on the horizon, faintly visible in the darkness. The island slowly materialized before them, as if emerging from the folds of time and space. This could very well be the beginning of the end. Chapter 2: The First Steps into Hell. The only sound filling the air was the howling wind battering the ship. As time passed, the island slowly loomed closer, and each of the passengers felt a tension they couldn't shake off. The horizon was completely dark, with not even a glimpse of stars piercing through the thick clouds that enveloped the place. "Are we in the right place?" asked Rami, the man who was usually calm by nature, but his face betrayed a deep anxiety. "I feel like there's something strange in the air." Sarah was studying the map once again and answered in a low voice, "Yes, this is the spot, but I can't quite describe how I feel. There's something unsettling." Mark, who was starting to feel increasingly uneasy, looked at Sarah with concern and said, "You know what worries me more? That none of what we know about this island has been confirmed. Do you know who sent us on this trip?" It was now Sammy's turn to speak, the man who knew a great deal about criminal networks in major cities. He was tight-lipped, but he couldn't hide his past experiences with these kinds of dark tasks. "What I know about this island is that it was once a haven for shady businessmen for decades. They hid here, hidden from the world. And there's talk of a lost treasure, but there's something else, something far more dangerous." Everyone looked at him in silence, their hearts beginning to race. The treasure he mentioned pointed to a criminal network that was known to everyone, but no one dared approach. Sami knew that this network could be involved in many dark crimes, but he had a feeling that this island concealed more than just lost wealth. The ship was now drawing closer to the shore. The darkness thickened as the screams of one of the passengers rang out. The cries grew louder, and it seemed as if the wind carried unfamiliar sounds, as though the island itself was calling to them. "What's happening?" Sarah screamed as she ran to the front of the ship. "Do you hear that? Something's moving in the water." But before they could investigate, the waves crashed against the ship, and the wind struck it with terrifying force. The shore was in sight, but the sea refused to let them approach easily. At that moment, something strange lit up in the sky. It was a bright green light coming from the heart of the island. "What?" Rami whispered. "Is that?" Everyone fell silent. Something on the island didn't seem natural. Mark, always the adventurer, said, "If there's something terrifying in this place, we'll find out now." However, as they neared the shore, they began to feel an unsettling presence in the air. The island seemed almost dead, with no signs of life on the surface, but strange noises were coming from the dense trees. Something was watching them. Once the ship reached the shore, The passengers jumped off one by one, but as they stood on the dry ground, they felt that the earth beneath their feet was not as it should be. The ground was dark and rigid, as though it didn't belong to this world. The silence was heavy, as if the island itself was watching them. Sami was the first to take a look at the shore and said, "We've done something foolish. It won't be long before something shows up that we won't like." Mark smiled sarcastically and said, "We'll see who's the fool when we discover the treasure." But the treasure, which they all thought was a distant dream, was tied to a massive criminal network, and the threads of the game were beginning to weave around them faster than they had anticipated. They didn't yet realize that one step on this cursed land could cost them far more than they ever imagined. Chapter 3. The Beginning of the Nightmare. Everyone stood in complete silence in the heart of the island's forest, taking in the strange place that now surrounded them on all sides. The ancient trees stretched toward the sky as if trying to erase the marks of time. The air was thick with dense clouds, and the faint rays piercing the sky revealed details veiled in shadows. "I feel something strange here," Sarah said, her eyes warily scanning the surroundings. Her gaze shifted between the massive trees and the wide gaps between them, as though she was waiting for any movement. She knew the island concealed dark secrets, but she wasn't fully prepared for what lay ahead. "No time for contemplation. We need to move," Rami said, trying to take control of the situation. He appeared determined to complete the mission, no matter the cost, yet his heart was filled with unease. He wasn't sure whether pressing forward was the right decision, or if turning back might have been the better choice. As they continued to walk through the dense forest, Sarah sensed something unnatural. There was a strange feeling in the air, as though the atmosphere itself was disturbed. The quiet in the place was unsettling, and even the sounds of the wind seemed muffled, as if trying to block everything happening around them. "Are we in a familiar place?" Mark asked, trying to shake off the confusion that was creeping into him. "What if we're not alone here?" Mark's words echoed in everyone's minds. "Let's find out for ourselves," Rami answered, attempting to sound reassured despite the tension creeping up on him. They had ventured deeper into the island, and with each step, their anxiety grew. They felt they were inching closer to discovering something incredibly dangerous, something that could change the course of their lives forever. At that moment, Sarah suddenly turned around, a feeling of discomfort overwhelming her. "I hear something," she said in a low voice. "Did you hear that?" Everyone froze, focusing on the sounds around them. At first, they heard nothing but the whispers of the wind through the trees, but after a few moments, the sound became clearer. It was a faint noise, resembling distant screaming or the hushed whispers seeping from a dark place. "What's that?" Sami whispered, looking at his companions with concern. "Do you think we're hearing something real, or is this just our imagination?" The atmosphere was thick with suspense. No one wanted to be the first to move, but something urged them to press forward, as if the island itself was drawing them deeper into its heart. As they moved ahead, they discovered a narrow path between the trees, as if the earth had swallowed the old road. "Let's go this way," Mark said, stepping forward, determined to continue, no matter the cost. The path surprised him, but it didn't seem like anything more than a dead end to be navigated until they reached their goal. As they walked, the air changed abruptly. It became thicker, pressing down on their chests, as if they were trying to breathe in a confined space. Even the sounds of their footsteps, which had been echoing in the open, began to disappear, as though the sound was being absorbed by the void. The trees seemed to be watching them, as though the island itself was aware of every move they made. The darkness gradually increased, and soon shadows surrounded them from every angle. They were now deep in the forest, and each step brought them closer to the unknown. "Do you feel that?" Sarah asked, sensing that something was off in the air. Something's not right here. But they couldn't respond, as suddenly the complete silence was shattered by a distant scream. The sound was almost like crying, and it seemed to come from a very far distance on the island. The noise was so strange, as if someone were screaming for help, but it was distorted, as though it were part of a sick dream. We need to go back!" Sarah cried, her eyes frantically searching for any way out. She screamed at them, terrified of what might be about to happen. But Rami grabbed her arm and said, "No, we're not going back now. We're close to discovering something great. We must continue." They moved on despite the growing fears, but there was no turning back now. They had ventured deep into the island, and there was no path leading them out. At that moment, something else appeared. Shadows moved quickly through the trees, and the sound they had heard was only the beginning of what was to come. A group of figures appeared before them, dressed in dark clothing. Their bodies were dark, and their faces were only visible through the faint light that pierced the forest. "Who are you?" Rami shouted, trying to appear brave as he faced the strangers. But there was no answer, and the men approached swiftly. "You've walked right into the trap," one of them said quietly, but the words were laden with menace. Chapter 4: Secrets of the Shadows. The air in the forest was heavy, and with each step they took, the pressure seemed to increase. The trees were tangled together, their dark leaves falling as if they were covering something ancient. The time had come, and their breaths were held as they advanced into the unknown. The gap between hope and fear was tiny, and the closer they got to the center, the greater their sense of insecurity became. Sarah smiled, trying to hide her anxiety from their faces, but her heart was pounding. "Rami, do you think we'll be able to leave this island safely?" Rami answered, cautiously continuing his steps. "I think we won't know the truth until we see what these people have in store for us. We need to be careful. Each step could be decisive." But Mark, who always leaned toward practical solutions, was trying to think through every step. "We can't give up now. We have one choice: discover what's going on here, then find a way to escape. We need to be prepared." Suddenly, they all stopped when they heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. 4 men appeared in front of them, dressed in dark clothing and carrying strange weapons at their waists. Each one looked at them with cold eyes, as if they were complete strangers in this forest. Their features were hidden beneath dark masks, and no one could tell who they were. "Who are you?" Rami asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the anxiety twisting his heart. One of the men answered in a harsh tone as he stepped forward. "We are the guardians of this place, and you are nothing more than guests in land that doesn't belong to you." His voice was threatening, yet there was something odd in it, something that went beyond a mere threat. Sarah, standing behind Rami, raised her voice with difficulty. "What do you want from us? We're just a group of people who got lost. We're not looking for trouble." The man smiled cruelly and said, "We're not looking for you, but you came here, and now you must pay the price." Their eyes darted around quickly, and it was clear that these men were waiting for the moment to attack. But Rami tried to control his nerves, forcing a tight smile. "If that's the case, then what do you want from us?" The man stood before them, speaking in a calm but deliberate tone. "We are searching for something more valuable than life itself. Something very old, buried deep within this island. Something that can give us power and authority beyond imagination." His words surrounded them with mystery, and Sarah wondered to herself, what is this man talking about? She tried to mask her confusion, but inside, their dark eyes had planted fear in her heart. "And what do you want us to do?" Sami asked, trying to remain calm, but it was obvious that the situation had become far more complicated than he had thought. The man smiled coldly and said, "You have no choice. All of you will help us. If you don't, the consequences will be worse than you can imagine." Sarah recoiled. "What do you mean by consequences?" But the man, still smiling, motioned for them to follow, making it clear that the discussion was over. They began walking behind him, while the forest seemed to close in around them more and more. The trees nearly choked the path, and it felt as though the place was transforming into a floating nightmare. They finally reached a strange place. It resembled a large cave, its walls covered in dark carvings and stones that reflected light in an eerie way. A weak draft entered through a crack in the wall, accompanied by a faint sound that resembled a cold wind. "This is the place you were supposed to reach," said the leader. Their eyes jumped to the room he was pointing to. It was a massive chamber, covered in dust and resembling ancient caves. In the center, there was a huge coffin, adorned with mysterious symbols and designs that seemed to pulse with life. The coffin was pyramid-shaped, covered in dark stones, and as they got closer, Sarah felt an odd sensation wrapping around her heart, as though she had known it for a long time. "What is this?" Mark whispered, stepping cautiously toward the coffin. "Is it just an old coffin?" But the man smiled again, raising his hand dramatically as he said, "No, it's not just a coffin, it's a key to a distant past. Whoever possesses it can control everything, life, death, and even time itself." A strange feeling seeped into their minds as if these words were piercing through them, stirring up endless questions. What was this man talking about? Did this island hold something beyond imagination? The man added, "The thing inside is not just power. It is the secret of life itself. And whoever possesses it controls the fate of the world. So we must all be part of this quest, or pay the price." At that moment, everyone felt something odd moving in the space around them. The trees swayed as though reflecting something invisible. The faint light emanating from the coffin cast distorted shapes on the walls. But something else was beginning to change. The coffin began to shake slowly, then faster. With each tremor, the noise intensified until it filled the entire room, and everything around them started to move as though the coffin wasn't just a physical object, but a gateway to another world. "What's happening?" Sarah screamed, stepping back from the coffin, but there was no escaping the change. And as the coffin began to open slowly, the strange green light grew stronger, its beam extending to engulf the entire space, marking the beginning of an event that could change everything forever. Chapter 5: The Lost Treasure. The wind howled fiercely across the island, mirroring the turmoil of unfolding events. Samer and his friends were coming to terms with the reality that they were ensnared in a trap far deeper than they had imagined. This was no mere pursuit of a group of criminals. It was something far greater, something dark, seeping into every corner of this place that once seemed like paradise, but was, in truth, an island of despair. That fateful night, the friends huddled in a safe spot inside one of the caves they had recently discovered. The sound of waves crashing against nearby rocks filled the air outside, yet the silence inside the cave was far more unnerving. The dim light from their old flashlights flickered against the damp walls. Hassan kept watch, peering through a narrow crevice in the wall, while Iyad sat beside the small fire, studying the faces of his companions. Hassan broke the silence, his voice low and strained as he tried to mask his unease. "Time is running out. We need to figure out who's behind this network before they realize we're digging under their feet." "I don't see another way forward," Samer replied, his voice tense. "We have to unmask these criminals. We need to know why we're here and how we got caught in this trap." His eyes shifted to Noor, who sat in the far corner of the cave. Their gazes met for a brief moment. She too was deep in thought, anxiety etched on her face, though she dared not voice her fears. "I think the answer lies on the neighboring island," Iyad suggested cautiously. "The one with those old tunnels we found. Those tunnels might lead us to something bigger." "And then what?" Hassan asked, his worried eyes scanning the group. Noor finally spoke, her voice calm yet resolute. "We have to trust each other. There's no turning back now. We got into this together, and we'll only get out of it together." Her words weighed heavily on them all. They knew retreat was no longer an option. In that moment, Samer realized they were bound by a shared fate. The only choice was to follow through, no matter the cost. The following morning, after a restless night filled with introspection and unease, they set out for the neighboring island. It represented their only hope, or perhaps their inevitable destiny. They crossed the turbulent sea in a small boat, the waves pushing back against them as if the waters themselves sought to hinder their passage. The boat, barely big enough to hold them all, rocked precariously as Iyad steered. Hassan sat at the bow, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, eyes wide with anticipation. Noor sat behind him, struggling to keep her balance as the wind whipped around her. Samer, ever watchful, monitored them all, his anxiety growing with each passing moment. They were heading into the unknown. As they neared the island, peculiar details began to emerge. Marks on the rocks hinted at the presence of others who had been there before them. But these markings were unlike anything they had seen. Ancient symbols etched into the stone, suggesting something hidden beneath the surface, something they had to uncover. They approached the shore with caution. Though the island was small, it exuded an eerie aura. Scattered caves, jagged rocks, and oddly shaped plants growing in unnatural patterns gave the place an otherworldly feel. "Do you feel that?" Hassan muttered, his voice tinged with suspicion. "This island isn't normal. Yeah, something strange is going on here. We need to stay alert," Samar replied, his eyes darting between the suspicious landmarks. Before they could delve further into their thoughts, two figures emerged from the shadows. They appeared to be native to the island, their sharp weapons glinting in the faint light, their eyes filled with wariness and hostility. "Who are you?" Samar demanded, his eyes blazing with defiance. He knew there was no room for retreat now. "We're the ones who decide who lives and who dies here," one of the strangers replied, raising a long blade. "This island isn't for amateurs." Suddenly, a fierce fight broke out. Samar tried to push one man away while Ayad struggled to subdue the other. The situation quickly spiraled into chaos. Noor, acting swiftly, leaped forward to distract one of the attackers, giving Hassan the chance to deliver a decisive blow. But just as the skirmish ended, an ominous sound echoed from deep within the island. It was a low, guttural noise, like the growl of a massive beast, or perhaps something far more sinister. The fight came to an abrupt halt as everyone froze, faces pale with fear. Was this the trap they had been trying to evade all along? Or was a greater threat waiting for them in the depths of the island?